Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Autodesk Virtual Academy presented by KETIV Technologies. I, Adam Evangelista, Application Engineer / Customer Success Manager, will be your host here today. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, a longtime fixture of KETIV, a genuine tentpole of authority and technical expertise, none other than our very own Javier Chavez. Javier, do you want to go and introduce yourself, man?
Yeah, that's the first time I've been introduced as a temple, so that's interesting. Anyways, I'm familiar with a lot of you guys. I've spoken to you guys over the phone. I've delivered lots of training, but my role at KETIV is that of a technical solution specialist. So I work with a lot of other members on our team to try to match up the right technologies, the right processes, the right services to your needs. So long-time Inventor user, long-time AutoCAD user, long-time Vault user, and I've used quite a few other tools as well. So I'll hand it back over to you there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Javier. Yeah, really glad to have you. It's always a pleasure working together, man. Fun fact about Javier is that Javier doesn't have any fun facts. We were preparing for this presentation and I had asked him as much and he's like, Adam, I don't have any fun facts, but I do think this particular workflow is absolutely revolutionary and I want to spend as much time as possible in the presentation. And I couldn't agree more. This is a highly anticipated topic that a lot of people have been expecting, whether they were aware of this feature or not that was coming in 2022. So definitely want to get into it. And just a bit of house cleaning before we get into the main presentation, of course. This is a Zoom webinar if you guys are unfamiliar. So if you guys want to interact with us, some people have already been able to raise their hands. There is a Q&A button and also a chat section inside of your action bar where you could raise your hand, of course. Thank you, Michael. Or ask any questions if you have any issues with audio, yada, yada, yada. Recordings do go up at a later date on our YouTube page, so feel free to grab that later on when they go up. And if you have any feedback, positive or otherwise, feel free to fill out the surveys that go out after this request as well. Feedback is very much appreciated. And I think with that, Javier, take it away, man. What do you got for us today?
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video here and just continue with the presentation portion of things. But with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about what model states are, right? And just kind of define them, talk about what they do, what they don't do, what they're not, and talk about how they make representing a model easier, right? We'll also go over some use cases, some different scenarios where you might be able to use them. I probably won't cover 100% of those, but I've got some resources I can help you out with to give you some more ideas, okay? Now, when we talk about the use cases, we'll also, demonstrate how to create them, how to work with them, etc. And one of the things I did add kind of last minute here is a bullet point to talk about behaviors, very specific behaviors when it comes to bill of materials and Vault, okay? Some things you want to be aware of. So stay tuned for that part of it. Along the way, I'll try to give you some tips. And before we get started, let's go ahead and jump in to a poll, right? So Adam, if you could go ahead and launch the poll here, right? And you'll see the first question is, how are you currently representing multiple configurations of your design, right? A lot of people using iParts or iAssemblies. Some people will use derived components. And then a lot of people will simply just create another model completely, right? They have to manage the two models, even though they're similar. So make sure you start filling out that poll. The second question you'll see there, do you need to show or represent various manufacturing stages of a design, such as forming or machining? Simple yes or no question. And then the last question is, do you use the derived component feature inside of Inventor? Okay, lots of reasons you might use that, but a lot of people will gravitate towards using that to create another version or another state, really, of an existing model.
Yeah, looking about 50% over here, but yeah. You see the fourth question there too, Javier? So what version of Vault you're using?
Yeah, sorry. Last but not least, what version of Vault are you using? Are you not using Vault at all? Are you using either Vault Basic or Vault Workgroup? And I'm grouping those together for a reason. You'll see why a little bit later. Vault Professional does treat model states a little bit differently, or can. So answer accordingly. We'll take a look at the results here in just a moment.
All right, yeah. We're about at 75 over here, but I think we have some general trends we could do. I'm going to go ahead and end polling from here.
And are you able to show those results?
Yeah, I think, do you see the results on screen right now as a panelist?
I do not. So that might be just something in regards to a panelist, but I would think I'd be able to comment on those results. So.
I got you. Let me summarize here then. For question number 1, how are you representing multiple configurations of designs? A majority, about 63%, creating separate models. Number 2, do you need to show or represent various manufacturing stages of a design, such as forming or machining? Heavy majority, 75% yes. Do you use the derived component features in Inventor? Majority 58% yes. And what version of Vault are you using? Majority 55% Vault Professional.
Okay, excellent. So, okay, hey, now I see them. So
there we
now
go.
I'm able to see those polls.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, so very good. I'll probably take a look at those at some point as well, maybe even after the webinar.
Yeah, we have this on record.
It'll definitely, play into everything I'm talking to here. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about, exactly what are model states, right? So model states are, new in Inventor 2022, right? And they're just a different way to represent your models, right? And it does provide, when you create these representations or these model states, it does provide a few different ways to maybe have unique parameters within each model state, unique iProperties, and unique BOM information. Okay, so you can see some examples, showing up on the screen. I'll probably go into those a little bit more in detail in just a moment. Okay, but the next thing we'll talk about here is how do they simplify? How do they make this easier? Right. So I'll talk about the past first. Right. Other methods that you used in the past, they require you to manage multiple files. Right. So let's just say you wanted you have a component and you want to create different variations on it. The traditional way, right, would be, if you're going to use some of the tools that help you do this, would be to create what's called an iPart factory. And within that iPart factory, you might create a table with, parameters, iProperties, things that are unique to that new version that you're going to create. So for example, if you wanted to create larger versions of this handle, different color versions of this handle, handles with different machining features, etc., right? You're going to create a table that defines each one of those uniquely. And at some point, you're going to have to generate an iPart member. Okay, the process is the same, really. If you're going to derive a component, you're going to create a sort of a base component and derive it kind of like you would the iPart members. And if you ever want to edit those features, right, or add a new member, you're going to have to go back to that iPart factory, make some changes, and possibly republish, right, these parts. And all in all, you're having to manage, in this case, 4 parts. If I want to go ahead and 4 part files and their links and all of that stuff. So it's a pain to manage. Okay, iParts, iAssemblies still have their place. Derived components still have their place, but they are a little bit more difficult to manage. So there's a simplified way, and as long as it meets your criteria, your needs, right, I think it's going to do well for you. Okay, iAssemblies, same thing. You need multiple configurations of an iAssembly. You're going to create an assembly factory. You could also derive that assembly. There's ways to do that as well. But again, if you need multiple iterations or configurations of this assembly, even simplified versions, right? You're going to go to a table, modify some of the parameters, things like constraint values, etc., and create this other alternative version of your assembly. And again, now you're having to manage multiple assemblies. Okay, so I like them. I saw some information there in the chat regarding the way they work, etc., and how you like them. But I think you'll find that there's some distinct advantages to working with with these tools, right? With model states in particular. So with model states, it's a single file. Okay. And so now we're looking at this same handle part, right? And within that single part file, you do very similar process. You create a table, you tell it what to suppress or what parameters are different, so that you can generate, all these different iterations of that handle. And when you do, you simply create a model state within that part file. So no more blue blocks that represent parts, right? And you have all these different iterations. Now, assemblies going to be the same thing, right? One assembly file, right? And if you want all those other configurations, you simply create a model state that turns on or turns off some of the components, changes parameters, right? Maybe adds an entirely new component, okay? So from a file management standpoint, really, really simplified, okay? So use cases, part simplification, right? You can see here, going back and forth, you could build this into your workflow for all your components, especially components you're eventually going to simplify at an assembly level. And basically turn off features that would sort of define this as a much more simplified part, just a simple cylinder or a rectangle, right? So with parts, we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. And part configurations, that's, I think, the simplest one that comes to mind. You're probably going to have, multiple sizes of something, and you can see on the left-hand side, we're simply clicking on different configurations to suppress holes, suppress features, etc., or change parameters as well. Okay. Other ways you can use this, right? So think of sheet metal. Sometimes you need to give directions or visualize what the process is, which bend you're going to put in first. And I think we touched on this, I think either last week or the week before with Jamie. We did another ABA specifically on sheet metal. Okay. And very similar, the machining process, right? So again, we have model states that represent machining processes. And the biggest difference I see here is, this is a single part versus maybe the configuration where we saw the handle, create different handles. That's actually going to touch on iProperties. We need to change part numbers. We need to change the description, etc. Okay. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into actually taking a look at how to do this with parts. And I'll start with an example I have here of a machine component. So the model states start to show up here in every single part file you have. Now this one's complete. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this stuff and start over. Okay. So your master, you'll always have that. You can't get rid of that model state. It'll always be there. But as soon as you want to create a new one, right, you just right click and choose new. Okay. Now you'll notice that there is a pencil next to that model state. There's also an arrow there. The pencil, right, will tell you which one of these model states you're currently editing. It'll also do a few other things. So you'll see that here as I go along. I'm going to go ahead and name this first. So I'm going to call this my billet aluminum version, right? I want to represent the machining process. And if I go through the end of part and I kind of travel back in time, it started out as this. So it makes sense to model the way you'd machine it if you can. In this case, we started out with an extrusion. That represents my billet aluminum. So I'm going to drag this back over, and you can see one of the machining processes, even though I think it's out of order, it is cutting out this corner. There's a hole here that gets put in. That's actually going to be my second machining process. And then as I go through, I'll add more of these processes in my model states. So with that said, now that I'm editing this billet aluminum one, right, I'm going to go ahead and suppress pretty much everything that's here. I right click and I choose suppress. And that is now a part of that model state. So if I go back to master, it's complete. Everything's unsuppressed. And if I go back to billet aluminum, right, there's most of the features are unsuppressed. So I can right click and copy this and create a new model state, right? Now, before I go and edit this and start making changes to the second one, I'm going to make it active. I'm going to double click and make it active. I'm going to rename it. Okay, so let's go ahead and rename it now. So that's my hole at the very center that I'm going to machine. And so at this point, I have the billet aluminum, and maybe the first thing I machine is that hole. I'm going to right click and unsuppress that. Okay, so that now represents the first machined feature. So I have, a master that's complete, my billet aluminum component, and a machined hole. Okay, so while I'm doing this, it's creating a table in the background. And I'm going to go and expose that table to you now. So if I right click here, you can see I have edit spreadsheet. Okay. And so if I go ahead and click OK, it'll bring up Excel and it'll show me each row represents one of the states. Okay. Master, billet, aluminum, machine. And it's taking each one of these features and computing or suppressing them. And the master basically has all the features computed or on. Right, so I could easily add another one here and tell it to, suppress or compute, suppress, compute. There's a number of ways to do that. I'm just going to keep modeling these changes. So I didn't make any changes as of yet, but I'm just going to keep modeling these. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Okay, so I'm going to represent the rest of my machining features in just a couple features here, but I'm going to go ahead and call this one bore. Where maybe I'll bore out that hole at the center. Okay, and I think that shows up right here. So you got to remember to make it active. So I'm going to double click on bore. And that's extrusion number 3 represents that bore. I'm going to go ahead and unsuppress that. I'll copy that. Okay, and for the sake of time, this is going to be the rest of my machining features. Right, so I'll activate that, and I'm going to make sure that everything is unsuppressed. So I'm going to go ahead and select the remaining features and unsuppress those. Okay, so I now have the way we start off machining this. Second step here is the hole machining, the bore, and the rest of the machine features. Okay, so something to note here, if you're familiar with working with iParts, a quick tip, if we go to the Manage tab, you may be familiar with member scope and factory scope. So if you ever want to add a feature to a member that only applies to one of the members, right, you're going to set it to member scope. And if you want to add a feature or make a change that affects the entire factory, right, all the members here, then you're going to set it to factory scope. Okay, so it affects your modeling as well. And so I'll do this maybe in a different exercise. But what you'll notice here is that when this is set to member, or sorry, factory, all the pens are lit up because the changes you make, whether you're drawing sketches, you're changing iProperties, etc., affect each one of these, right? And if I change this to member scope, okay, now the things that I do are only affected where I see the one pen. It's just the one member that I would be affecting. So iProperties, parameters, etc. Those things that I would be changing would only affect that one member. So keep that in mind as we go forward. I think it should be really helpful. The other way to activate that besides this pull down is to double click at the top pen. Sorry, single click. We're set to factory scope. Click again, we're set to member scope. And of course, if you double click on a member, you're now editing just that one member. Okay, so another example here, right, within parts is a way to maybe simplify your components. So let's take a look at the simplification process, right? Let's go and open the next part here. and I'll see if it'll let me open it a slightly different way. Actually, let's go to our parts. I was going to simplify stuff, but let's go ahead and just make another unique configuration with our parts. Let's start with this. There we go. Okay, so here's a component. I want to create several different versions of this, right? Some with 4 veins, 3 veins, etc. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get started by maybe creating a new version of this, right? I'm going to go ahead and check it out. I am using Vault, so this part works the same. And I'm going to create maybe a 14 vein version of this, right? And I'm just going to call it 14 for right now. But while I'm in this, I'm going to go ahead and change parameters here that control that. So the number of blades, I'm going to go ahead and change that to 14. Okay. So when I'm done, I've got 14 blades versus 20. And I now have the master, which was set maybe at 20 blades, and this, which is now set at 14. Okay, so I'm able to control parameters, and I'm able to create different versions of this. But when I go to the spreadsheet here and I take a quick peek, you're going to notice something, right? The only thing it's adjusting is, or having me add in right now, is the blade number. So what else do I want to add? I probably want to change things like iProperties, things like the part number. So this is what I'll do. While I'm on here, while I'm on this 14 blade version, I'm going to go ahead and change the iProperties. Okay, you could see the description here shows 20 blades. I'm going to put 14, right? And maybe change the part number. Okay, so I'm editing the one member. Okay, these changes that I'm making right now only apply to the one member. So I'm going to go ahead and make this 845. That's the new part number. Maybe change the stock number to match the number of blades, etc. The things I'm doing here are unique to that version, and this automatically starts adding to the table. Okay, so when I take a peek at the table again, okay, it's added in more columns to support the changes that we just saw here just a moment ago. Okay, including the part number. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fill this in a little bit differently here. I've got another spreadsheet where I've got a lot of this information kind of ready to go. So bear with me while I gather some of that.
And to clarify too, Javier, these aren't like separately saved spreadsheets, correct? These are specific to the part, so they don't have to get checked into Vault separately or anything like that.
Correct. Correct. The spreadsheet lives within the file, so you don't have to go and manage it there.
Yeah, it's similar to other Excel exports in the Autodesk environment too. Yeah, so it's specific to the part.
Right, and iParts are basically the same thing. They get treated the same way. Let's do one last one here. Okay. So with that said, this is actually part number 0. Okay. There we go. So I filled this in. These other members did not exist a moment ago. You could see I only have 2. And so we're going to go ahead and close this. Give it a second. And I've just generated all sorts of different members here through that. right? When it comes to the drawing, we'll take a quick peek here. But when it comes to the drawing, you can see here, I have a drawing with a view of this already. You can always edit the drawing or, refer to the model state, okay? And click on that pull down and show the 10 or the 14 blade version, etc. So as you put in those views, now when you want a list, if you're trying to create a drawing, a datum drawing that represents multiple components like this, you can go to the general table tool, right? Pick the view, and it knows that this is attached to model states, just like iParts. What columns do you want to see? Okay, I want to see the part number. Okay, maybe not the member name. That doesn't mean anything to the user, but the part number does. The number of blades, and maybe the description. So this table now represents, all the different iterations of this. We can show separate views showing, each one of the iterations, but I think it's pretty clear that, sometimes you'll get a 20 blade and sometimes you'll get an 18 depending on the part number, right? So that's how you work with some of those. And I'll come back to simplification in just a moment. Let's get back to our PowerPoint, right? So that's how you start using them with steps. Use cases for assemblies, okay? Very, very similar. The process works almost identical. But in this case here, you might simply suppress components to show maybe stages of assembly, etc. Okay, so just some ideas on how to work with this. If you're taking a look at maybe a weldment, this is a good example just because there's a lot of little processes within a weldment, right? There's a part where you're simply welding raw stock material, you're machining it in multiple steps there. So very similar to, the machining process for parts, but now we're looking at, individual components within an assembly. Okay. So here's a really interesting case that combines both parts and assemblies. Okay. Think of a flexible hose. If you have a stock part number that comes in, let's just say 18 inches, and you might use it one way in one assembly and a different way in another, okay? It's possible to create a model state that's assembly specific and use this bent version in an assembly. Create another model state for a different assembly where the same 18-inch tube gets bent differently in an S shape, a Z shape, or stays straight, okay? So you can certainly, have those type of environments as well. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start taking a look at the assemblies or demoing the assemblies. Let's go take a look at those. Okay. And let's go ahead and find my simplification version. Okay, so I have an assembly, and I basically want to create a simplified version of this assembly. And so I'm going to start by simplifying this part right here. Okay, so this component right here, you can build this process into every single component that you build. But in this case here, let's go ahead and open the part that goes along with this. Okay. Now, I've already added a master version of this with, a ton of detail. We call one fine, okay, because I know I'm going to use it to simply have different representations of this. Revit uses fine, medium, coarse, so you can kind of create this to match if you're exporting to BIM. I have a medium one that simplifies things a little bit further, and I'm going to go ahead and create a coarse one, okay, that simplifies things a bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new model state here. And let's go ahead and rename it to coarse. Okay. And instead of just suppressing and turning off stuff here, I'm going to use a simplification panel. So if you're not familiar with this, this is one of my favorite tools. But I'm going to go ahead and go down here where I can turn on some of these panels and put a check next to simplification. It pops up over here, and I get start, removing some details, removing fillets, filling in voids, etc. I'm going to use a define envelopes tool. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and pick this rectangle here and start to resize it. So I'm going to make sure that it encompasses, the overall width, depth of this rectangular part of the design. Okay, and that's going to sort of take over that rectangular portion of the design. I'm going to hit the apply button so that I can create maybe a secondary feature. And this next feature, instead of a big rectangle, right, I'm going to go ahead and make this a bounding box, or sorry, bounding cylinder, right? And so as I pick this, I might choose maybe a different feature here, but it's going to represent that cylindrical end. And I'm going to go ahead and resize that. And you can see I've got buttons here that'll help me snap to maybe this larger diameter. Arrows here that'll let me snap and size maybe up to this face. And let's make sure I'm getting up to the very end of this here. So all of that is going to sort of encompass what you see here and give us a really coarse representation of this. Okay, so here's my really coarse representation of this, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. So I now have a fine, right, a medium, and a coarse. Okay, so coming back to the assembly, okay, I have a matching fine, medium representation. I do not have a coarse, so I'm going to go ahead and create one here. The part's already here, right? I just need to create a coarse representation of the entire assembly. So I'm going to name them exactly the same. So that's going to be key here. I'm going to go ahead and name this coarse. And, within this part, if I take a peek at it, there is a model state called coarse because I just created it a second ago, right? And so I really want that to be turned on when I'm set to coarse at the assembly level. So I could manually double click on this and turn it on. I could go to the other parts that are here, and if they have a coarse option, I could turn those on. But the easiest way to work with this is to go up top to the productivity tools and link model states. It's going to go throughout the assembly, look at every subcomponent, and if there's a model state name that matches what I'm about to put in, it'll link them, right? So the dialog box came over here, and it reads the states at the top level at the assembly, and basically I'm selecting coarse. And if there's any coarse representations within the other components, it's going to go ahead and link them. Okay, so there it is. I can get to fine. Okay, and I didn't just change just the blue component. This has changed. This has changed. Several components have changed here. And I can go to medium, okay, simplified just a little bit, and then coarse, right, is a lot more simplified, right?
Javier, this kind of reminds me of the level of detail workflows that we used to use in the past as well. Can you comment on level of detail?
It's a direct replacement for level of detail.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. But it does more, right? So caveat to level of detail, if you were to insert this assembly into another top level assembly, and you inserted maybe 3 of these, you inserted one as fine, one as medium, one as coarse, but in the background, it would be a resource hog just because it is seeing 3 different files, whether you realize it or not. When you do it this way through model states, it now sees a singular file in 3 different states. So memory-wise, it's seeing one thing in 3 different, iterations.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that makes sense. And just something to note, we did if you're suppressing, if you're, I turned off some of the faces, if you will, on some of this. So if you look at your constraints, I'm set to this coarse one right now, but if you look at your constraints, there's several that are broken. So the other thing that this coarse model state catches, or captures, is the state of these broken constraints. So if they're broken, right, they're only broken because I've got some different iterations of these components, and surfaces have gone away, they've been suppressed. You can suppress them. So when I come back to fine, they're back. And when I come back to coarse, it's suppressing those. And if I were to look at the spreadsheet, right, it's capturing the suppression computing of some of these constraints. Okay, so good question. Somebody asked, how does this interact with iLogic models that used to have level of detail? I don't know the answer right off the top of my head. I think you need to go back to your iLogic and most likely replace some formulas, because there is specific iLogic that now refers to level of detail. So if I just go to take a peek at I'm just going to create a rule, and not that I'm actually going to write one, but on the left-hand side here, when it comes to assemblies, it should make reference in here to new, there it is, model state, iLogic snippets. Okay, so you're going to see those, and of course the other ones have gone away. So I don't know if you're going to have to rewrite those, maybe do a find and replace, because it's very, very similar, but different. Okay, so one more thing to note, and maybe I think what I'll do is I'll do this in a different exercise. Let's go ahead and take a look at another assembly here. Okay, so let's take a look at this assembly here. Okay, and this assembly basically goes from having a 2-unit component here to a 0, right? And it completely eliminates it. There is also I think, whoops, let's go ahead and cancel that. There is also a 4 version and a 6 version, I believe, that I'll add in just a moment. But something to note before I move on to add, other iterations of this, I'm going to go to the bill of materials, and let's go and set ourselves to 0. Okay, so when I look at the bill of material here, and I look at the structured assembly, somewhere in the list here, I'm going to see this set to 0. Okay, this is going to show up the same way on your bill of materials, so be aware of that. I've got some help for you on that in just a little bit. But let's go ahead and just create these other iterations. I know I have a 2, a 3, and a 4 unit, etc. So those get changed. If I go to the table, okay, I could basically copy these 2 rows, and there's one member that has a table replace option, right? So you basically are going to each one of these members, right-clicking, and just changing these. But of course, I can do this. I already know that this member, right, this component somewhere in here has a 4 unit, a 6 unit, etc. Almost all of these that have 2 units specified, etc., have these 4, 6, and maybe 8 units. All this other stuff will stay the same. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this from another spreadsheet here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take the 4, or I guess 3 and 4 unit version of this. And paste it in, right? This area here is really the only area that's changing. But I'm going to go ahead and close it, save it. And let's go and check it out because it is a vaulted assembly. And I want to go ahead and be able, want to make sure I can make changes to those. So now I have a 3-unit version, and apparently it's missing a component. Okay, and a 4-unit version, and I think I'll probably see that again, or maybe not. So, so I now have 3, 0, etc. Different versions of this. This works very similar to what we saw with the parts. You could manually create these and basically turn on components, or go to the component itself and change the model state from a single unit to a double unit to a 3-unit component in the browser, and that will change the actual model state table. Okay, so let's come back to presentation here for just a second. Right, let's talk about the behaviors. So bills of material, this is a big one. I mentioned that suppressed parts show at 0. Okay, so the fix or the answer to that, because you don't want to create a parts list on your drawings that have 0 quantities, use view reps, and I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a sec. And then within Vault, okay, interesting behavior here. If you go to Vault, okay, if you're using Vault Basic, Vault Workgroup, or even Vault Pro, and you're just using file release, those part numbers that represent different configurations, you might not be able to see those. You might not be able to do a search and find that. Okay, so if you actually need a separate part number, you might consider using iParts or iAssemblies. I've got some workarounds for that as well. But the item environment in Vault Pro does. So that's why, the polling questions we asked, are you using Vault Basic or Workgroup, right? That was one of the answers, and the other ones were Pro. Okay, so Pro gives you some unique workflows with working with items, item release files. Okay, so we'll take a look at that. So BOMs and Vault. Let's go take a peek. Okay, and let's get to the drawing. And I had a drawing for this. Let's go ahead. All right, let's go and create a brand new drawing. And let's go and put in a 0 unit because we know there's stuff suppressed there that's going to report as zeros. And I'll just put that view right there. Okay. Now, when I go to create my parts list, right? I don't know if you saw it, but the parts list was already pointing to the 0 unit version of this. It read the view and it was pointing to the 0 unit version of that. But you can see I've got a bunch of zeros. So when there is 0 of these components, it's not just one assembly, it's all kinds of other stuff that needs to be set to 0. So you see it here. So the answer to that, the thing you're going to want to consider is when you put in this parts list, you can edit the parts list and there's filters here. So when I go to the filter, right, I wish there was an option to refer to the model state. There is not. There is one for view representation, right? So I have one here for something called BOM, close-up, default, different thing, right? So I have to go back to my assembly. Okay. And when you're set to these model states, you have the option to copy as a view representation. Okay. View representations control colors, visibility of things, etc. So when I choose view rep, if this view representation is very similar to this in that those components that are not visible now will not be visible here, right? So with that said, if I go back to the drawing now, right, I now have the option to edit the parts list, go to my filter, and use my view representations to filter out everything I should have in the bill of material that goes along with 0 units. Okay, and as you can see, my parts list got shorter. I don't have any 0 quantity components. Okay, so something to consider there with Vault, right? Let's take a peek at Vault. And actually, before that, let's take a peek at one of the components I'm going to reference inside of Vault. Let's go to my finished version of this. So I have some master states here. That's actually not the one I'm looking for. Let's find. There we go. So let's go ahead and check this into Vault. I haven't done it yet. Single part. You don't have to manage, a ton of stuff here. And while it's being checked in, let's go ahead and find it here inside of Vault. Okay, so I don't know if you remember, but I had several different part numbers. When I look at this and I look over to the right-hand side, there's only one part number I'm going to see, and that is the master. Okay, so this part number corresponds with the master, and there was a 011845. So if I do a search for that, 011845, right? I don't find anything. I'll find 0. Okay. But I don't find the other ones. So be aware of that. That is Vault Basic. That is Vault Workgroup. That is Vault Professional when you're working with file release. And right now I'm showing this as just, working with files. You're only going to see that. So a workaround for that could be the following. If you go into the model itself and you edit the spreadsheet, it's going to probably ask me to make some changes, but it only reads this first one, and that's it. Okay, so a workaround for that could be either creating another property that captures all the part numbers, maybe separated by a comma, and that would work, right? Or maybe having the master row, show all the possible part numbers. Okay, so just be aware of that. And if you actually have to have different part files because that workaround doesn't work, maybe you're going to work with iParts and iAssemblies. Okay, so coming back to Vault, right? What if I set this as an item? So if you're not familiar with items inside of Vault, it's a way to manage components, from more of a bill of material standpoint. We care about items, and they may or may not have CAD files. They may be pamphlets or brochures, etc. Those are part numbers we have to order and put in an ERP system as well. That's kind of what the items manage inside of Vault. So when I assign an item to this, you're going to see here it assigns it. Normally, when you assign a single item, you get a dialog box that shows you it's going to assign it and all its little attributes, right? But you can see here it assigned it. If you're assigning multiple items, it does something different. So I'm going to go ahead and click on over to the item. There's a shortcut to get to the item. There's no single item that represents this. It read the model states and it created an item for model state number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. Okay. These should be the only items I have in my item master. And there they are. Okay. And so each one of these items is its own unique part number with its own unique description for 20 blades, versus 18 blades versus 16 blades. You'll see that change. All of these point to, you know, the drawings or components that correspond with them. So this 842 file will show up here, and it'll show up here. That is, you know, what's generating all of these. So this will actually give you multiple part numbers. And when you're working with items, you don't really search for files. You search for items first, and then see what that item points you to. Okay, so we'll come back here, right? So the item environment sees this. It works very similar for things like AutoCAD electrical and AutoCAD mechanical. A single file, you know, shows, you know, components, and it, you know, it'll extract multiple items from a single file. Okay, so with that said, I had another slide to actually demo the behaviors. I just did it, so I'll go ahead and skip over to just some announcements that we have. Adam, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to maybe make some of those announcements. There's some additional resources in regards to, I guess, what's new.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, just a quick heads up. Yeah, there's a lot of new information coming out with the 2022 stuff. And if you guys followed us for any of the previous AVAs, we have the recordings for Inventor Pro, which also covers model states a bit more as well, Vault, AutoCAD, and Fusion 360. If you want to go ahead and click on that link, Javier, if you could open it up and just paste it in there to the chat there. This is a. Oh, I'm sorry.
Which link do you want me to?
The top one first, please. Yeah. So we have the recordings, and like we said, the recordings for this will go up at a later date as well. But these links and these recordings are available if you guys are looking for more info on what's new. Feel free to check out our YouTube page. And we also have some new blog posts up at KETIV as well, especially if you guys are interested in deep dives into bill of materials, especially. We have some good stuff over there. And thank you, Javier. Yeah. And then you can go ahead and post that second link there as well. And I do want to allow for some time just to look through these questions really quickly. We have about 5 minutes left here, so we could at least open up a few conversations here.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to pick one, and we can start kind of addressing some of these.
Yeah, and so let's see. In general, I got a lot of questions about Content Center here. Can you comment on just how model states are going to be interacting with Content Center? Like, is it going to be a different workflow since Content Center is largely based on iParts? Or is model states going to be the new iParts? Is it going to still publish the Content Center? What kind of changes are we looking at Content Center in that regard?
Good question. So iParts are not going away, right? iAssemblies are not going away. So they're still going to be there. Content Center only works with iParts. Technically, you can publish a single file, but everything I understand is that if you want to get a table of components into your Content Center, it's going to be iParts. Okay. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, when do I use iParts? When do I use Content Center parts? So I would say, you know, there's a page in the help files, and I'm going to go ahead and try to give you guys a link to it here real quick. But it does go through and basically pose the question, when do you use iParts versus iAssemblies? And it gives you a chart. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat.
And then so yeah, make sure it's sending out to the attendees as well there. I'm reposting the resource links as well from the previous slide.
Got it. Okay. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and send one here. I'm going to show it on the screen.
Perfect.
Okay. So if you were to go to help and look, search for configurations and representations, multiple ways to do it: iParts, iAssemblies, model states, and as you go down here, it starts talking about some of them. But towards the very bottom here, there's a table, right? And it kind of helps you make a decision. And it's not just model states. There's some confusion about what view representations do, what positional representations do, et cetera. But the last two columns are dedicated to model states and should help you decide, which one to use, right? So it talks about the purpose. What's the purpose of view, positional, model states, iParts, iAssemblies? which ones generate separate files, right? View states don't, no, iParts do. Okay, that could be an issue one way or the other. What are they used for? Feature component suppression, component exclusion over here on the right-hand side, part feature suppression, other configuration properties. Effect on, so performance, if you're thinking about performance, what does it do, right? You're going to want to take a look at these. There's a lot of similarities, but there's definitely some differences.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's still definitely a decision you guys will have to be informed about to make properly, of course. And so Content Center and just the general use of model states is going to be really important. Yeah, and you touched on iLogic as well. And, there's still some stuff that needs to be sussed out about that as well. But there's new functionality for model states in addition to the rest of that stuff as well. Is there any way to convert existing iParts and iAssemblies into model states right now?
The only thing I can think of is possibly copying information from the table to the other table, having, opening up the table, but there is no, right-click option, convert to model states.
I see. Yeah, and just they made a big emphasis with Autodesk as well that your existing iParts and iAssemblies still fully functional and you can still go through that workflow. So don't expect those to like break per se. It's just still available for sure.
That's correct. Right. And watch when you're inserting files as well. So, if you've got a brand new assembly, right, as an example, but now when you're working with files and you go into place, something, with a model state. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a part here. Okay. As you're picking it, you do have the option down here to go to options and choose right away, which one of the states you want. Okay. So you could do it ahead of time. It shows up in a lot of dialog boxes. So watch for it when you're choosing components. If it's got model states, you can select it and typically go to options and choose ahead of time which one you want.
On that same vein as well, what do we expect to happen to old level of details for 2019, 2020 parts that get migrated into 2022? Do you know what happens to the level of details for those parts?
They get converted to model states.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
And by the way, your model states. So if I take a look at model states, there are model states, and so the ones that just suppress and turn off visibility and stuff, they're just going to show up on the model states. Your substitute level of details are going to get migrated to substitute model states. And there is the option to create, again, a new substitute model state that just completely swaps out whatever is in your assembly and replaces it with one of these choices, derived assembly, a simplified model, a part assembly file. Okay. Yeah. Just keep in mind, if you do that, it changes your BOM. So if your BOM had 10 parts and you swapped it out with a single simplified part, then your BOM just changed to a single line item for that part. So just be aware of that.
Beautiful. Okay. We're at the top of the hour here, Javier and friends. I think we do have to call it over here, though. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Javier, for presenting this topic. Again, expect a survey to fly out to you guys after this presentation. And the recording is going to be available on our YouTube page at a later date as well. But feel free, as always, to reach out if you guys have any more questions beyond that. Enjoy the rest of the week, everyone, and take care.